Afghanistan
Afghanistan is a country that, at critical moments in history, has remained an arena of confrontation between major powers. In the winter of 1358-1979, Soviet forces entered Afghan territory and began military intervention in support of the communist government in Kabul. This invasion was not merely a regional war, it was one of the significant chapters of the Cold War. Its resistance, battles, and consequences affected not only Afghanistan but also the political balance of the world.
Afghanistan, the land that empires have entered, but from which they have returned with wounds, defeat, and bitter memories. Winter of 1358-1979, the dark day history named the 6th of Jadi. When the sound of tanks shattered the silence of Afghanistan's northern borders. The Red Army of the Soviet Union, during one of the largest military operations of the Cold War, entered Afghanistan by land and air. The objective was clear: to protect the communist government in Kabul and to consolidate Moscow's influence in the heart of Central Asia. At the beginning, Kabul, Bagram, and Shindand air bases were turned into major Soviet military strongholds. Even before the arrival of Soviet tanks, Afghanistan was facing a deep political crisis. The Moscow-backed communist government, from its earliest days, ruled through force, arrests, and violence. In cities and villages, voices of protest rose from every direction. Herat, 9 months and 13 days before the invasion, thousands poured into the streets, but the government's response was bullets. Herat became a symbol of bloody repression. After this uprising, the Kabul government extended its hand to Moscow for survival. Kabul, 6 months and 4 days before the Soviet Union invasion. The Chandawal uprising. On the 2nd of Saratan month of 1358, solar calendar, Kabul witnessed one of its bloodiest urban uprisings. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, residents of the Chandawal area seized the Premier Cinema building and disarmed the police forces. That building was a place where weapons were stored to suppress the people. After this, the uprising spread. One after another, local police stations fell into the hands of the popular insurgents, and hundreds of people, carrying green flags, poured onto Maiwand Road. At that moment, it was believed that this movement would lead to a widespread uprising in Kabul, but this hope quickly faded. The ruling authorities of the time rapidly deployed soldiers to the area and began firing on the demonstrators and even on ordinary passers-by. Many of the wounded, out of fear of the government, were deprived of access to hospitals and medical care. Nevertheless, the government of the time described the incident as a minor and localized event, a narrative that still conflicts with the memories of the survivors and the families of the victims.
The Chandawal uprising marks the beginning of a chapter for all uprisings in Afghanistan. Its significance lies in the fact that it took place in the capital, only a few kilometers from the Arg presidential palace. It became known as the Vegetable Sellers Uprising, because there was a vegetable seller in Chandawal, my father. Since it occurred in the capital, this movement began on June 23, 1979. At that time, oppression under communist rule had reached such a level that even two people could not speak freely to one another. In the first phase, all religious scholars, intellectuals, thinkers, and anyone who had even 20 people gathered around them were taken away. Which Puli Charki prison stands witness to all those crimes.
که پلگون پلچرخی شاهد تمام جنایات اینا هست. جهان در این فکر شد که افغانستان کشور نیست که مانند کشورهای آسیا.
The world began to realize that Afghanistan was not a country that Russia could swallow like other Asian nations. Soviet military power was so vast that even Europe dared not look toward the Berlin Wall that divided Germany east and west. Yet it was the faith of the Afghan people and the uprising of Chandawal that created the belief that Afghanistan would become the graveyard of the Soviet Union and the cause of its collapse.
Kabul/4 months and 23 days before the invasion, the Bala Hissar uprising. About a month and a half after the Chandawal uprising, a second major movement began in Kabul. This movement, known as the Bala Hissar uprising, was planned for August 5, 1979. Its goal was to overthrow the government of the time and the Khalq and Parkhan factions, the groups which, according to eyewitnesses, followed the directives of Moscow's puppets. The plan was precise and nationwide. Strategic military centers in Kabul, such as Bala Hissar, Khwaja Rayash and Bagram airfields, the military club, and rocket brigades, as well as Radio Kabul, which was guarded by 10 tanks, were to be seized. The timing was chosen wisely, so that security forces would be on alert and officers gathered for lunch, making their elimination easier. But the plan was never executed. On the night before the uprising, some leaders and activists were arrested. After extensive torture, many details of the uprising were revealed. Before operations even began, the government detained most activists and declared a first-degree alert. As a result, the uprising failed before it could begin, and the city remained under the shadow of repression and fear.
بعد از قیام چنداول قیام بالا حصار به وجود آمد علیه دولت کمونیستی.
After the Chandawal uprising, the Bala Hissar uprising emerged against the communist government. With faith in God, they rejected communist rule. These revolutionaries and mujahideen exported the message of Afghanistan's resistance through their blood, sending a warning to the Soviet Union that the Afghan people would not accept a communist government and would stand firm against it.
در مقابل حکومت کمونیستی نمیگن و ایستاده هستند.
Kabul, the Chandawal district. 1 month and 29 days after the Soviet invasion, on the night of February 22, 1980, the city awoke. That night, later named the Allahu Akbar night. People climbed onto the rooftops of their homes and shattered the silence of the capital. This was the first sign of urban resistance. But the real turning point came weeks later. The cry of Allahu Akbar rose from rooftops, streets, and neighborhoods. Thousands flooded into the streets. Anti-Soviet demonstrations spread through Chandawal, Pulikishti, Darulaman, Afshar, Kushalmina, Kalaifatullah, Bala Hissar, and Dashti-Barchi. The people, unarmed or carrying only primitive tools, stood against one of the world's most powerful armies. Some reports say police cooperated with the protesters, and some soldiers refused to fire. But the response of the government and the Red Army was swift and severe. Occupying tanks rolled into the streets. Urban warfare began.
د عامه کتابتون د جریدو او مجلو مدیریت ته راغلي وو.
We have come to the Directorate of Newspapers and Magazines at the Public Library, where more than a century of newspapers and journals are preserved. We had previously coordinated with Director Abdul Wahid Quraishi so that he could prepare the newspapers from that day. We examined the Hewett newspaper dated 5/1358, Sunday, to see what the newspapers of that time wrote and published regarding the popular uprising of Chandawal. Statement of the Ministry of Interior and Security Forces. Dear and honorable citizens of Kabul, since the morning of the 3rd of Hut, foreign agents and mercenaries, puppets of Britain, America, Pakistan, and China, have engaged in clear acts of disruption and sabotage against freedom and the security and peace of the people of Kabul. This was what the state media and press of the time said about the popular uprising. As for the truth, we go to the Chandawal area of Kabul to hear from eyewitnesses and victims of this event.
بعد از قیام بالا حصار قیام سوم هود به وقوع پیوست در کابل که شب الله اکبر بود.
After the Bala Hissar uprising, the 3rd of Hut uprising took place in Kabul, the night of Allahu Akbar. People stood on their rooftops shouting Allahu Akbar until morning. From areas like Chandawal and Cinema Pamir, gunfire echoed. Their voices were answered with bullets, yet the people continued to stand firm. Many residents of Chandawal and Kabul were martyred. The uprising of the 3rd of Hut was a city-wide uprising, unlike the previous two which were limited to specific areas like Chandawal and Bala Hissar. On that night, many of our dear Kabul citizens were martyred.
امگانی شد و در این شب بسیار در هر نقاط کابل مردم کابلیان عزیز ما به شهادت رسیدند.
The uprising was crushed, gatherings of more than 4 people were banned. A nighttime curfew was imposed. Mass arrests began. Many of those arrested never returned. Yet, the uprising of the 3rd of Hut broke the silence. It carried a clear message: occupation is not acceptable.
و اینا ترفند را به کار بردن کمونیست‌ها در اون روز.
The communists used a tactic that day. When they took control of the streets, they would ask each person where they were going. Those who had shouted Allahu Akbar all night naturally had changes in their voices. Anyone whose voice showed signs of strain was taken away. To this day, nothing remains of many of them. The Chandawal uprising became the key that sparked uprisings across Afghanistan. At that time, the world realized that Afghanistan could become the quagmire of the Soviet Union. Countries united to support and assist the Afghan Mujahideen. Over 14 years, through the power of faith, the people succeeded in contributing to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
با قدرت ایمان خود از هم بپاشانه.
په راتلونکو کلونو کې جګړه پراخه شوه. د کلیو بمبار، د ملکي وګړو شهیدول، نیونې، شکنجې او بې محکمې اعدامونه د افغانستان د ورځني ژوند برخه وګرځېده. شوروي لښکرو د افغانستان په ډیرو سیمو کې د پیل شوې ولسي مبارزې پر وړاندې نه شاتګ وکړ او نه بحران مهار کړ، بلکې د دې ولسي پاڅون ځواب یې د ملکي وګړو په ډله ییزه وژنه ورکاوه.
During the 9-year Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the Afghan jihad and resistance took many forms. Continuing this documentary, we travel to Nurk district of Maidan Wardak province, where a sister named Malalai killed a Soviet soldier with a sickle while defending her brother. This is a documented account of Afghan resistance and struggle. Whether it was 10 a.m., 12 noon, or 1 p.m., if I am not wrong, it was daytime. We had gone outside to fetch fodder and had placed it on the roof. His grandmother had taken it to the pile. Suddenly, someone ran from that side. When they entered our house, they seized a young girl. 3 of them surrounded her. My sister stood up and freed the girl. They pulled my sister. Women came out from the rooms into the yard. My sister grabbed the Russian advisor, the big infidel, and struck him. After that, she was martyred. Every woman of Afghanistan, my sister, every mother, every daughter, has turned herself into a trench against every occupier, whether Russian, American, or British. They have fired weapons, taken part in battle, cooked bread for fighters. Every Afghan woman, like my sister, is like Malalai. Praise be to God, this is a place of pride, a place of honor and gratitude. In this way they stood against the occupiers. With nothing but a sickle in hand, she killed a Russian soldier. They had Kalashnikovs, they had tanks, but the people of Afghanistan, even empty-handed, truly carried out jihad. Martyrs Bazaar, in the center of Maidan Wardak province. This market later became known by that name after, during the Soviet occupation, a Scud missile was launched from Kabul and struck a wedding bus here. On that bus were 106 people, including 2 brides. After the missile hit, all of them were martyred. It is considered one of the most tragic accounts of Afghan suffering during the Soviet invasion.
په دغه سیمه کې دلته دې ته ورته ډېرې ناخوالې تېرې شوي دي. زه به بېلګه دا درته راوړم. دغه چې تاسو وینئ د شهیدانو دا.
In this area, many similar tragedies occurred. As an example, the martyrs' flags you see here, during the time of the Russians, a vehicle was coming from Kabul carrying 2 wedding parties. There were 2 brides. The grooms could not attend because soldiers were fleeing due to the jihad. When they arrived here, a Scud missile, like the one you see, was fired from the Scud launch site and struck the vehicle directly. Inside were 106 people from the districts of Maidan, Pagman, and Jalrez. All were martyred. The 2 brides were completely burned in the fire. Among the martyrs were Muhammad Rafiq from Chahar Kala, Officer Ahmad Jan, son of Mahmud from Sefid Ta village, and the mother of Dr. Sharaga from the below Kala, along with many others. All 106 passengers were martyred.
خو دغه څه دغه چې و پرسونل دي د یو سلو شپږ نفران دا مکمل ټول په شهادت ورسېدل.
د مجاهدینو په برکت، د مجاهدینو په وحدت، د مجاهدینو په عاقلانه شتون کې چې په میدان کې والا د پتوران امان الله رحم وکاندي کومې قوې چې دلته راغلې دلته په ګونډو داسې خلکو موږ باندې متر باندې میدان اخیستی خو موږ په کیلومتر وزغلول. دوی د میدان په متر اخیستی و چې حتی هغه ځای باندې چې دوی لاس د چرګوړي چرګانو دا شی وړه کور یې نه پرېښود، انسانیت یې نه پرېښود، تمدن یې نه پرېښود، چا ته د انساني فضا اجازه نه ورکوله. دوی وحشي وو، وحشي فکر کې راغلي وو.
د نړیوالو بنسټونو راپورونه ښیي
Reports from international organizations indicate that during Soviet military operations, widespread massacres of civilians occurred in various provinces of Afghanistan. These events present a clear image of the nature of the war in Afghanistan, a war in which the greatest victims were civilians.
ډېر قربانیان یې ملکي وګړي وو. د پروان ولایت سالنګ ولسوالۍ ته پر لاره یو.
We are on our way to Salang district of Parwan province, where Soviet forces brutally martyred 1,200 people, including women and children.
او ماشومان هم شامل وو.
One day there was heavy rain and snowfall. They came to occupy Afghanistan. At first, they did not openly attack everyone they saw. It was not like that in the beginning. When the Russians came, I was in the 11th grade. At first, they did not interfere much, but later, wherever they stayed, they pressured the people. They beat them, beat their cattle, destroyed everything. People were terrified. I saw it as my duty of faith and conscience to join the jihad. When I saw so much injustice from the Russians, I was forced to go to the mountains.
سلاح خودم موشکش بود. بازی سلاح را گفتن که کم کم که کلاشینکوف.
My weapon was a hunting rifle at first. Later, little by little, we acquired Kalashnikovs, 11-piece, 5-piece sets, and other weapons. God gave strength to the Mujahideen, and we captured weapons from the Russian, Khalqi, and Parkami forces and equipped ourselves. Our heaviest weapon was the RPG-7. Beyond that, we had nothing.
سلاح ثقیل ما از راکت RPG-7 از RPG-7 و بالا نداشتیم.
سالنگ د شمال او جنوب
Salang, the strategic corridor between north and south. During the Soviet withdrawal, on the night February 3, 1989, many villages in southern Salang were targeted by ground and air attacks. More than 1,200 civilians were martyred in a single night. The Salang massacre became a symbol of revenge and defeat.
خو د سالنګ عامه وژنه د غچ او ماتې سمبول شو.
ساعت 6 صبح بود که حمله شروع شد. با سرکردگی
At 6 a.m., the attack began, led by Shahnawaz Tanai. From Kali Sirk he commanded. I swear by God, in the Salang Valley so many heavy shells were fired that you could see their thickness with your own eyes as they passed. But when God protects someone and gives them strength, no one can harm them. We were inside these houses. You see these houses? We were here when the attack started. Even birds were struck down by the explosions.
دم خواب بودیم که یک دفعه این می خانه ماست. این میجا که قرصه کنیم نصف خانه رفتم.
We were asleep when suddenly a shell hit right here in our house. Half of it collapsed and slid down, but we were not harmed. Our time had not yet come. Until noon the next day, no one knew what had happened to anyone else. Any livestock that went outside was shot, any person who stepped out was shot. When morning came, the fighting stopped. Some people were missing, some houses were destroyed, some people were killed. When we counted, more than 1,200 people from our settlements alone had been martyred, excluding those traveling by vehicle or on foot who were also killed.
شهیدی از اینمیا را کلش باز آوردن.
They gathered the martyrs and took them to Jabal Saraj. We stayed here one more day after the Russians left. When the internal forces arrived, they asked, for God's sake, where were you that you survived?
برای قرآن شما در کجا بودی که زنده موندی؟ یک روز بعد که عروس از اینجا آخریش رفت، باز یک روز بعدش قوای داخلی.
A day after the last Russians left, domestic forces came and turned every settlement into military posts. They ordered us to leave. Those who survived, women, children, young and old, were displaced. For 4 years we lived in the plains of Kabul, in Cherekar and Jabal Saraj. For years we remained displaced there.
All in all, from 1979 to 1989, about 620,000 Soviet Union soldiers fought in Afghanistan in rotation. After 9 years, the Red Army, exhausted, wounded, and without victory, was forced to withdraw. On the 26th of Dalwa 1367/February 15, 1989, the last Soviet tank left Afghanistan. According to official figures, the war cost the Soviet Union thousands killed, thousands wounded, and billions of dollars. Afghanistan paid with millions of victims, and the Soviet Union, a few years later, collapsed. The 26th of Dalwa marked the end of an occupation, and the beginning of a historical truth, because this is the land that serves as the graveyard of mighty empires and heroes.